what is now the Long Island area of New York State, and they became successful farmers. Well, in the early 1800s, a young man by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt, sorry, my brain's not working right now. Cornelius Vanderbilt came to his mother, borrowed $100 from her, and with that $100 he bought himself a ferry boat. And he used that ferry boat to transport goods and services across Long Island Sound. Well, at the end of the first year he wound up with 3 boats, and from that beginning he amassed a large fortune in shipping, and then later in his career he was into railroads. So by the time Cornelius passed away, he was worth close to $100 million. Cornelius and his wife, Sophia Johnson Vanderbilt, had 13 children. The 4th oldest child was the oldest male of the family, and his name was William Henry Vanderbilt. And he took over the family business and actually doubled it, and inherited most of the fortune, and inherited most of doubled it in less than 10 years before he passed away. Now, William Henry and his wife, Maria Louisa Casson Vanderbilt, had 8 children. The 2 older sons went into the railroad business, and they inherited the bulk of the Vanderbilt fortune, and the remaining children got about $10 million apiece. Percentage-wise, it doesn't seem like that much, but it was a lot of money for that time frame. And all of George's brothers and sisters had built elaborate mansions in New York, vacation homes in Newport, Rhode Island, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and all those places. And I like to think that whether it's true or not, since George was the baby of the family, he wanted to outdo his brothers and sisters. I'm not sure whether well, he did, but I'm not sure if that was his initial intent or not. But anyway, George was the youngest of his family, and he came to Asheville with his mother in 1888. She was ill. Asheville was well known for a lot of health clinics, tuberculosis clinics, hot spring spas, and things like that. And we don't know for sure what her illness was, but we do know that she got better after her stay here. So while she was receiving her treatments, George traveled this area on horseback and found this piece of property and decided this was where he was going to build his home. So he and his agents began buying up property, and at one point they wound up with 125,000 acres. Now this area was overworked, overtilled farmland to begin with. So George worked with Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, to create the park-like settings surrounding the home, including the approach road and all that area. And the mountains at that time were not necessarily clear-cut, but pretty heavily logged and were a bit of a mess. So Olmsted worked with Gifford Pinchot and later Carl Schenck to help re-establish the forests around in the mountain area, and established the first scientifically managed forestry school in the United States, which became the predecessor to the U.S. Forest Service. As a matter of fact, Olmsted worked with Gifford Pinchot and later Carl Schenck, and Pinchot went on to become the first Forest Service director. Now, started construction of the house in 1889. There were 3 chateaus in the Loire Valley region of France that George wanted to pattern his home after. I think George initially envisioned like a 65,000 square foot home. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm going to get it a little closer, everybody get it closer here. George had envisioned a 65,000 square foot home initially. And when Richard Morris Hunt, the architect, saw the property, he said, oh no, you need to have a larger place in order to take advantage of the view. So we wound up with 175,000 square feet in the house. But there were 3 chateaus that built one was patterned after. There were the Chateau de Blois, Chateau de Chenonceau, and the Chateau de Chamfort, and took design elements from each one of those to create the home that you see here today. Now, it started construction in 1889, and it was completed 6 years later, which I think is amazing in and of itself, this huge home with all this hand carving that you see on here. You'll see a lot of the fleur-de-lis, that's one motif you'll see a lot of. You'll also see oak leaves and acorns, which is part of the Vanderbilt family crest. So, anyway, when the house was completed, it was 175,000 square feet. We had 250 rooms in the house, 65 fireplaces, 43 bathrooms. Now, the 250 rooms, part of them, I think, were closets and bathrooms and a lot of storage areas. But anyway, the house, they said it was 250 rooms. So, now, the house was a technological marvel for its time also. It had a central heating system, was wired for electricity, and had indoor plumbing. And a lot of these things were unheard of, especially here in the mountains of western North Carolina. Now, when the house was built, George was not married. But 3 years later on his travels, he met a young lady by the name of Edith Stuyvesant Dresser. They got married married in Paris, France, spent a 4-month-long honeymoon in Italy, and he brought her back to Biltmore for the first time in October of 1898. By the way, Biltmore comes from that ancestral family home, in, which is where they came from in Holland, the little town by the name of Bilt. And then moor means a rolling grassy plain. So, and if you look over the hillside, you'll see a lot of hills and stuff. So that's where the name Biltmore comes from. Now, when Edith came to Biltmore for the first time, she had never seen a home. Imagine being a young bride, and this is going to be your new house. Well, 2 years later, George and Edith had a baby girl, and this was the only child that they had. Cornelia, after her great-grandmother great-grandfather Cornelius. And George unfortunately died in 1914. He was in his apartment in Washington, D.C. when he contracted appendicitis. Now, the surgery for the appendicitis was successful, but he died of a blood clot a few days later. And he was only 51 years old at the time and only got to enjoy his home 19 years. But before he died, he was beginning to realize that maybe 125,000 acres was a little bit too much to handle. So he was in negotiations with the government about selling off some of the property. Well, a year after his death, Edith and her agents wound up selling about 87,000 acres to the government, and that created the core of the Pisgah National Forest, so that when you look over the back of the property, you can see the mountains preserved for us to enjoy today. Now, Cornelia got married in 1924. She married a young British gentleman, a diplomat by the name of John Cecil. And they had 2 children, George and William. And William, the younger one, still owns the house today, and his children help operate the day-to-day operations of the Biltmore estate. So it's still privately owned and family-owned and operated business. Now, talk a little bit about some of the architectural elements here. You can see the staircase right here is what they call a cantilevered staircase. And the steps actually extend to the outside of the building are supported by the walls and the columns on the outside. So that when you go up the grand staircase, it looks like the staircase is floating in midair. And you'll see the 2 statues on the outside are St. Joan of Arc and St. Louis. There's a lot of French influences here. They're patterned after 3 French chateaus, but the interior of the house is decorated like an English country manor. So we like to say it's an English lady dressed in French clothes. Now, at the top you see the figures that are sticking out. These were patterned after, around the balconies, the areas. These were patterned after gargoyles, which were done on castles and things during the Middle Ages. And their purpose was to keep rainwater from washing away the foundation of the house. Ones that we have are for decoration, because you see the nice gutters that we have to keep rainwater to go underground. Now, gargoyles always had scary faces put on them too to ward off evil spirits during that time. And I've heard that when water runs through those, it sounds like it's gargling. I don't know if that's where the name gargoyle comes from or not, but it makes a good story. Now, you'll see the figure that's sitting up at the top up there. We're going to see his companion on the other side of the balcony. That was carved from one single block of limestone. They brought it up there and carved it in place. Of course, when they were doing work on the house, they used mountain climbing equipment and stuff like that for all the building and stuff. And we also have an elevator shaft. We'll talk about the elevator when we go inside just a little bit. Now, at the top of the hill,